Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastratyarashatarini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastratyadashatarini Jaya Shri Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivastava Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivastava Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Hare Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki Jai Shri Shinitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol for joining this evening and for giving me an opportunity to speak on such an important topic. Please accept my humble obeisances, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, and please give me your blessing so that I can do some justice to what we're going to discuss today. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is. This is chapter 18, text 51 to 53. Buddhya vishuddhaya yukto dhritya manam niyamya cha shabdadin vishayam styaktva ragadvesho vyudasya cha vivikta sevi lagva ashi yatavak kaya manasaha dhyana yogo Paro nityam Vairagyam samupashitaha ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham parigraham vimuchya nirmamaha shanto brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Translation: being purified by his intelligence and controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, being freed from attachment and hatred, one who lives in a secluded place, who eats little, who controls his body, mind, and power of speech, who is always in trance and who is detached, free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, free from false proprietorship and peaceful. Such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. The purport: when one is purified by intelligence, he keeps himself in the mode of goodness. Thus, one becomes the controller of the mind and is always in trance. He is not attached to the objects of sense gratification, and he is free from attachment and hatred in his activities. Such a detached person naturally prefers to live in a secluded place. He does not eat more than what he requires, and he controls the activities of his body and mind. He has no false ego because he does not accept the body as himself, nor has he a desire to make the body fat and strong by accepting so many things. Because he has no bodily concept of life, he is not falsely proud. He is satisfied with everything that is offered to him by the grace of the Lord, and he is never angry in the absence of sense gratification, nor does he endeavor to acquire sense objects. Om Jnanatirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Generally at this time of year, people are making New Year's resolutions to improve themselves or to improve some aspect of their lives. And this verse is reminding us of some of the really important things, the spiritual aspects of our lives that we can improve. So Srila Prabhupada says in this purport that we don't improve the bodily conditions by material means for the sake of enjoying it. So what if we have to make some material improvements? What if that is essential or has to be part of our improvements for the year? So the important thing in that case is the mindset with which we are doing it. If we have to increase our material resources or improve our material appearance, then we have to do it knowing that Krishna is the ultimate enjoyer of everything that we are accumulating or everything that we are improving. Therein lies the problem actually for material society. Whenever there's a material acquisition, we immediately become proud of it. We think that it belongs to us and we want to enjoy it and keep it to ourselves. That's the general trend with things that we try to acquire or that we try to improve in our lives. And then it becomes very dangerous for our spiritual lives. Anything that's going to increase our ego and that's not going to help us get closer to Krishna is an impediment to our spiritual progress. So we see that Queen Kunti mentions this very important verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. Janmeshwarya Shrita Shribhir Edamana Madaha Puman Nevahard Hari Abidha Tumvai Tuam Akinshana Gocharam. My Lord, your Lordship can be easily approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty cannot approach you with sincere feeling. That is a very strong statement that she's making. But the reason that she says this is because generally, if somebody is blessed with any of these opulences, they don't feel the need to approach Krishna, even for anything material. Although we are told, of course, that we shouldn't approach Krishna for material things, when we need any kind of shelter, whether it's for a material cause or for spiritual, we must take shelter of Krishna. It will bring us closer to him. But someone who has all kinds of material opulences, they're less likely to approach Krishna because they believe that their opulences are going to help them in life to make all kinds of progress. And even when they do approach him, they're more likely to not approach them with that humility and to try and engage in his service because they're generally preoccupied with these things. So does this mean that we can't resolve to improve ourselves in a material sense? And the answer to that, of course, is no. We can definitely make these kind of resolutions to improve ourselves academically or materially or even in our appearance. But we have to keep in mind at all times that Krishna must be the primary enjoyer of anything that we're going to be working on. He is always, in all circumstances, the enjoyer of everything first and foremost. If we have that mindset, then we'll avoid the pitfalls that we've just mentioned. And whatever we're using in his service will definitely bring us closer to him. At every moment, we must keep in mind how he says, Aham hi sarva yagyanam bhokta cha prabhur evacha. He is the only enjoyer. So reminding ourselves, even every day, as often as we have to through the day, that he's the enjoyer of everything that we have, that we are his humble servants, will keep us from falling victim to being slaves to sense gratification, because the senses are always eager to enjoy everything, and they'll drag us in every different direction if we're not consciously keeping them under control. And then that makes us actually the servant of the senses, Godas, rather than the servant of the master of the senses, Rishikesh. And the danger of this is so great. Prahlad Maharaj is warning us in the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says that for those who have decided to continue their existence in this material world for the gratification of their senses, there is no chance of becoming Krishna conscious. So that's a very strong warning. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada always cautioned us against that behavior of allowing our senses to control us. He wanted that we become Goswamis instead of Godas. So when we hear the word Goswami, we think that it's applicable to renunciants and spiritual teachers, especially the six Gosamis who we will be discussing today, these exalted personalities. But the actual literal meaning of Goswami is the one who is the master of their senses. And any one of us can become a master of our senses if we always remember not to let the senses run wild and get engaged in sense gratification, and we offer all the objects of the senses to Krishna first, thus spiritualizing these things. So when we look at the lives of the six Gosamis in a little more detail, we know that right at the beginning of their association with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they weren't renunciants. They weren't living in the simple conditions that they eventually resided in Vrindavan. They were in the midst of the court of the Nawab. They were surrounded by all kinds of splendors. They were noted for their great learning, material learning. And they, of course, had great wealth themselves. They were very highly, they were held in a high esteem by the Nawab. So they had a lot of power. But the important thing for them was that none of that, although in the external circumstances, very distracting, none of that distracted them internally. They were devotees of the Lord from birth, and they were always conscious of how they were his eternal servants, and no amount of material opulence that surrounded them could actually distract them from that. So this is possible for all of us then. We always keep these spiritual truths in mind as they did. So we must be inspired then to set the kind of resolutions that will help us to make advancement on the spiritual path. It's so essential. And that's very difficult for common people to actually accept, because spirituality, in the lives of people in the material world these days, it occupies a very small part, if at all, of any significance. Spirituality is generally something that's just confined to a certain time in life. But what is actually occupying the mind of the common person, this need for material enjoyment, it's actually it's not worth it when we think about it, especially now if we consider what was happening in the last few weeks, particularly the holidays that have passed. people were generally involved in all kinds of activities that wouldn't turn out to be good for them. Overeating generally, so that now they're focusing maybe on dieting in the new year. That's a common resolution, or trying to get onto medication to control things like cholesterol and sugar, overindulging in things like smoking, drinking, and then wanting to quit them, overspending and now having to repay debts, and all the objects that money was spent on, new clothes that are probably now tossed into the closet because there's new fashions coming out all the time, gadgets that don't live up to their expectations or break, um, things that may have seemed flashy or interesting at the time, and now the neighbor or the relative has something better. And the worst waste of all, which is actually time. Many people would have been spending it sleeping or discussing things that are of not real importance, or um, wasting it on social media, and going off on holiday, coming back with a few trinkets, but all the problems are still the same. So maybe this is why this process of setting resolutions comes after this maximum period of enjoyment, like the holidays. Because when we experience all this enjoyment, we actually realize that it's not worth the trouble. It actually brings us more trouble. Then we feel like giving it up. And this is the kind of process that Prabhupada explains as bhoga tyaga. So bhoga is this material enjoyment that we become so steeped in. Then we have some negative consequences, and then we have to, or we want to give it up in some way, and that is tyaga, renunciation. So whether we give that up literally, like the Gyanis give up the whole world because they're frustrated with all the enjoyments, or whether it's someone who's just setting a resolution to give up, say, smoking, we realize on some subconscious level that material enjoyments are not good for us. And that's when the intelligent person would ask, but if the entire world seems to be focused on working to achieve material enjoyments, why are these enjoyments bad? Why do they cause so much pain? And why do we eventually want to or have to give it up? This phenomenon is actually explained by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, when he tells us about the different types of happiness that people are experiencing in this world. The reason that the material enjoyments are not what we think they are, that they are actually suffering in the guise of enjoyment, is because any kind of enjoyments in the modes of nature are not really enjoyments. So he says about the mode of ignorance: happiness which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be in the nature of ignorance. That's unfortunately a lot of what the holidays represent. Sorry to say it. Then he says about passion: that happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. And that's a typical situation that we've just been discussing now. And then about the mode of goodness, he says: that which in the beginning may be just like poison, but at the end is like nectar, is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. Now, we have to clarify here that this happiness is not transcendental happiness. It's not the happiness of devotional service for Krishna. This is the material mode of goodness, whereas anything that is in the service of Krishna is transcendental. It's above the modes. So although this mode of goodness is much higher than the other two modes, but there is some element in the beginning, as Krishna says, it seems like poison in the beginning. Even though in the end, it takes one to self-realization. And then from self-realization, one can come to the level of rendering service to Krishna. But when one comes to the level of devotional service directly, that's nectar from start to end. Even though there may be some kind of austerities that one has to perform as well in devotional service, because all of us need to undergo these purificatory processes. Because we have contact with Krishna through devotional service, we find that right from the beginning, that devotional service is pleasurable, even if there's austerities involved. Because of the austerities of the mode of goodness being so difficult for people, we find that the activities that once characterize these modes, this mode of goodness, like the process of of Jnana Yoga, which is studying scripture, or Ashtanga Yoga, they're not palatable to people anymore. It's so difficult that they're only getting bite-sized chunks of it in terms of yoga classes or philosophical courses. But these austerities are too difficult for them to even undergo. So this happiness of devotional service, this is the kind of thing that the Goswamis were experiencing all the time, even though externally, once they renounced their material opulences, it seemed like they were living in conditions that the common person would think were not very favorable. They were wearing loincloths, they were living under trees, and they were begging a little bit of food daily. But as much as that may be difficult for the materialist to accept, but what the materialist was actually experiencing as pleasure over the holidays may not be very wonderful to hear either. I was listening or reading a comment that Radhanath Maharaj made, to quote him. On the other hand, if you see the way nowadays people celebrate by getting drunk, vomiting, sleeping till the next day, thus they welcome the new year in a hangover, because that's the Western culture of celebrating things by getting drunk to forget all the miseries. And then he goes on to say that it's fairly dirty culture. It's sobering and tragic to actually hear, but that is the truth. That's the reality of what people are facing these days. So, if they're wasting their lives in this way, and others who are not exactly engaging in these kind of, these kind of activities, but they haven't yet experienced the happiness of engaging in devotional service to Krishna, then their happiness is also very ephemeral. And it is compassion for all these souls that caused the Goswamis to take up the lives that they did. They didn't need to undergo any kinds of austerities. They were in their spiritual identities, according to the Gaura Ganodesh Dipika, they were the Manjaris, mostly the highest associates of Krishna in Goloka. So austerities were not necessary. But they were not only setting the example by their austerities for those who want to enter the renounced order of life to see what it actually entails, but they were also writing and recording how to live a properly transcendental life for people like us who are not able to undergo such austerities and are still surrounded by so many material opulences that are distractions. One particularly important verse in this regard is from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, written by Srila Rupa Goswami. Anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjataha nirbandhaha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagyam uchyate. When one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to Krishna, one is rightly situated above possessiveness. So Srila Prabhupada has explained this verse to us many times to help us understand that even if we can't live as simply as the Goswamis, or for some reason we have to increase our possessions, our austerities, our possessions, our luxuries, and other things, as long as we are always mindful that it's not ours, that we're custodians of it, that it belongs to Krishna, and we keep that internal spirit of renunciation that the Goswamis did, then we are rightly situated. So the reason we are discussing the Goswamis today in particular is because it's the disappearance day of Srila Jiva Goswami. As we mentioned earlier, he was the son of Anupam, who's the brother of Srila Rupa and Srila Sanatan Goswamis. And he's a very inspiring personality. We're going to discuss his life a little bit, and that of his disciples, and of course of his writings, which is the most important gift, another good resolution to make, to try and find out and read, if we can, these commentaries that he gave us on the scriptures, because without the understandings that the Goswamis have given us or have added to the scriptural canon, it's very difficult for ordinary souls like us to actually approach the highest truths of the scriptures. So Srila Jiva Goswami was the youngest of the six Goswamis. And so he had maybe the least, if any, association with Lord Chaitanya, but he was also the most prolific writer. He wrote 500,000 Sanskrit verses, which equates to about 25 books, which is absolutely incredible. And he's actually regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Sanskrit scholars by modern Sanskrit scholars today. This is even more remarkable when we consider how he wrote. He had a metal stylus that could indent on palm leaves. So there was no rewriting or correcting mistakes or spell checks. Yet, what the scholars these days find is that his verses were perfect in their meaning and their meter. They're actually extraordinary. So, Srila Jiva Goswami appeared in Ramakeli, which is in West Bengal. He was a pure devotee from birth. He was always engaged in serving the Lord in some way or the other. He had made deities of Krishna Balaram that he was completely devoted to, and he would worship the deities and give the prasadam of the deities to his playmates. But he was also an accomplished scholar. He was well versed in Sanskrit grammar, poetry, logic, and philosophy. And he had, of course, mastered the Srimad Bhagavatam. He had the extraordinary fortune of going on parikram with Lord Nityananda himself in Navadvip, and he went to Varanasi, which was the great seat of learning, to study Sanskrit. From there, he went to Vrindavan, where he took instruction from Srila Rupa Goswami, serving him very humbly and very faithfully, and he took initiation from him. So Srila Rupa Goswami imparted to him all the knowledge that Rupa Goswami himself had received from Lord Chaitanya. And so all the writings of Rupa Goswami and all the writings of Srila Jiva Goswami, which are based on Rupa Goswami's writings, they're all coming directly from Lord Shri Krishna Chaitanya, who is the supreme authority on the Vedas, being the writer of the Vedas. We know that famous verse, Vedesha Sarva Sarver Aham Eva Vedya Vedanta Krit Vedavid Eva Chaham. So these writings are the highest scriptures, so essential for our understanding, for our proper practice of devotional service, and also to have a good philosophical basis to convince the people who are involved more in suffering now, we realize, than enjoyment in the material world. The potency of devotional service is so obvious, because when people are introduced even to a little of it, some bite of prasadam, something that they hear from classes, um, just the chanting on the street, many people's lives have been turned around completely. So the power of this devotional service to be captured in literature, it was done by the Six Gosamis. And it had never actually been done before. Although the Srimad Bhagavatam was available from the beginning of Kali Yuga, but we had discussed that impersonalism and voidism had exerted such an effect that the Srimad Bhagavatam wasn't being discussed and commented on properly, and it wasn't being broadcast the way it should, the way it was after the Six Goswamis, after Lord Chaitanya and the Six Goswamis appeared. And there was a lot of reasons for this, besides the fact that we spoke about in previous class about the impact of impersonalism and voidism, but also that commentaries and good explanations, they were becoming less and less as the deterioration of Kali Yuga was happening, and the Brahminical class was also being less dependable to be able to transmit this knowledge to the people. A lot of the time, we know the Brahmins were Brahmins in birth only, and people were just, if they were listening to Srimad Bhagavatam, it was the professional recitations that Srila Prabhupada often spoke very strongly against, that are just kind of focused mostly on the 10th canto, because people want to hear about Krishna and the gopis, because they think, again, enjoyment, this great enemy of spiritual life, that it's for their enjoyment, that is justifying their enjoyment also. So we see that the essences of this great scripture were being lost. And Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya himself was very strict about that. He didn't tolerate any faulty commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam. His secretary, Swarup Damodar Goswami, was always checking that the manuscripts that were put before the Lord by commentators were actual manuscripts of devotional substance. So the Lord entrusted his dearest associates who understood his mood, his mission to spread the teachings of the Bhagavatam far and wide. These dearmost associates were the ones that were writing these books. As the Chaitanya Charitamrita says, in the course of time, the transcendental news of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan was almost lost. To enunciate explicitly those transcendental pastimes, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu empowered Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami with the nectar of his mercy to carry out this work in Vrindavan. And so from these great Goswamis, from Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, and the other Goswamis, Jiva Goswami, we get this extraordinary body of spiritual literature that we now have that didn't exist before, for all of us to take advantage of, to dive deep into what devotional service actually is about. So, Srila Jiva Goswami, as we said, was the most prolific writer. He wrote the famous Six Sandarbhas, many commentaries, poetry, works on Sanskrit grammar, rhetoric, and deity worship. And his incredible volume of literature is a treasure chest for Vaishnavas. He also established his Ishtadev, Sri Sri Radha Damodar in Vrindavan. These deities were personally made for him by Srila Rupa Goswami. And after the passing of the other Goswamis, Jiva Goswami became the foremost acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas of the time. He was still, though, humbly welcoming and teaching all the Vaishnavas that came to Vrindavan. But the challenge was that the Vaishnavas that were in other areas of India, particularly Bengal and Orissa, who couldn't come to train under him, they needed this literature, this wonderful canon of Vaishnava literature that the Goswamis had left behind. So there had to be an arrangement made for these literatures to travel from Vrindavan. And this wonderful and extraordinary task was taken up by the most foremost of Srila Jiva Goswami's students. And we'll touch on their lives because they're actually our Vaishnav heroes. And it was certainly no easy task for what they had to do, because we know that there was no such things as printing presses or the internet to pass documents along, and there certainly weren't even the transport means that we have today. So these were painstakingly hand copied scriptures by stylists on palm leaves that were transported for months by bullock cart. And it was certainly no easy feat with all the dangers of the time. There were still highwaymen, there were tax collectors, there were a lot of difficulties, especially because India was under the Mughal rule. So our three heroes are Srinivas Acharya, who was the Shakti of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Narottam Das Thakur, who was the Shakti of Lord Nityananda, and Shamananda Pandit, who was the Shakti of Advaita Acharya. So we'll give a little brief bio on each of them. So Srinivas Acharya, he appeared in a Brahmin family in Chakandi, and his father was known as Chaitanya Das. His father had actually gotten this name because he had been present at Lord Chaitanya's sannyas ceremony, and he was so moved by the experience that he could only repeat the Lord's name, Chaitanya, over and over again. This Chaitanya Das and his wife were personally instructed by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when they went to Puri that they should have a son, and this son's name should be Srinivas. So Srinivas, of course, was like Jiva Goswami, extraordinarily learned and devoted, and he had a desire to go see Lord Chaitanya at Puri, but he unfortunately reached there too late. The Lord had already disappeared from the world. This was a theme that carried on throughout his life. Unfortunately, he also didn't get to learn Srimad Bhagavatam from Gadadhar Pandit, and Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami also left the world before he met them. So he was very despondent at all these points, but he was being guided by dreams that he should continue to Vrindavan, and there was extraordinary destiny that was awaiting him. He then took Diksha initiation from Srila Gopal Bhatt Goswami, and then Shiksha instruction from Srila Jiva Goswami, and that's where his extraordinary tale comes through. Next is Narottam Das Thakur. He appeared in Gopalpur in Rajshahi, which is in Bangladesh, and he was born in a family of Kayastha, which is he was the son of a king actually. And at his birth, the astrologer predicted that he would either be a great king or a great preacher. So although his family wanted him to be a great king, his destiny was to be a preacher. And we know this from an extraordinary story that happened years before his birth. Lord Chaitanya was in ecstasy in a kirtan in Kanai Natashala. And in the middle of that kirtan, he started calling out the name of Narottam. So when he came to external consciousness, and Lord Nityananda asked him about this event, Lord Chaitanya went to the Padma River and he gave pure love of God to the river goddess and told her to keep it there for Narottam Das Thakur until he would come to retrieve it. When he was 12 years old, Lord Nityananda appeared to him in a dream and told him about this. He went to the Padma River, became intoxicated with love of God, gave up the kingdom to his uncle, and went to Vrindavan, where he also took Shiksha from Srila Jiva Goswami. But his Diksha Guru was Lokanath Goswami. Initially, Lokanath Goswami was too humble to accept a disciple, but Narottam Das Thakur impressed him with his own humility. He was cleaning his evolution area in secret for a year, and when Lokanath Goswami discovered this, he eventually initiated him. And the third of our extraordinary personalities, Shamananda Pandit. He was born in a family of cowherdsmen in Utkal in Orissa. Because his parents had lost many children before his birth, he was called Duki. And Duki was also extraordinarily spiritually realized and learned. And he also knew from a young age about his spiritual destiny. He knew his spiritual master's name, even though he hadn't met him. And he asked his father if he could travel to Bengal, to Ambika Kalna, to take initiation from his spiritual master. So after his father gave him permission, he approached Hriday Chaitanya Prabhu, who was a great devotee of the Lord living in that area, Ambika Kalna, and he accepted him as a disciple. And seeing his wonderful devotional qualities, his spiritual master sent him to Vrindavan to train under Srila Jiva Goswami. And once again, he has an extraordinary story there. There are many versions of this pastime, but the one that I hear very often is that he was given the task, Dukhi Krishna Das. He was now known as Dukhi Krishna Das after his initiation. He was given the task to sweep the area of Vrindavan in the early dawn for all the pilgrims. And in Sevakunj, he found this extraordinarily beautiful anklet. And seeing it, he immediately felt ecstatic symptoms, and he was so drawn to how beautiful it was. It was actually the anklet of Srimati Radharani herself. She had dropped it the night before. And so, in disguise, Lalita Devi came to fetch it. So Dukhi Krishna Das refused to give it to her politely, wanting to meet the owner. So he was, after his form was changed into his original spiritual form, he was able to have darshan of Srimati Radharani herself. She took that anklet and pressed a new tilak into his forehead and gave him a new name as well, Shamananda. So these three extraordinary personalities, they were very highly favored by their spiritual masters for their learning and for their devotional qualities. They were entrusted with all these scriptures to take it to the Vaishnavas who were waiting so anxiously for this knowledge. So they had a lot of adventures along the way. The scriptures were stolen by a dacoit king. The great Srinivasacharya converted this king and the entire kingdom to Vaishnavism. Narottam Das Thakur went on to Keturi, where he established a beautiful temple and the amazing Keturi festival that united all the Gaudiya Vaishnavas at the time. And Shamananda Pandit went on to his home area in Orissa, and he also converted thousands of people to Vaishnavism, also established a temple and initiated wonderful disciples like Rasikananda. So these personalities are amazing. It should be our constant desire to learn about them and to read about what they've left behind for us in all these scriptures, and to make some effort in our spiritual life, to make some resolutions to improve, to inspire others as well, and to be preachers of this great knowledge, to save the world from the kind of sufferings that we're seeing. And that will please the Lord the most in this year. So thank you so much for your kind attention. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Are there any questions from anybody who's in the chat? Or corrections or clarifications?
Hare Krishna. Thanks. This is Ravindra. Thank you for the nice class. I just went through your bio. It's really inspiring. I just wanted to ask you the Sanskrit course that you are taking. What is it all about? What are you going through in this course? What is the syllabus?
So it's just a basic course I wanted to start off with. Actually, my hope is to join one of the ISKCON orientated courses on the Harinam Vyakarana. This is actually written by Srila Jiva Goswami himself. And this is an extraordinary Sanskrit work, which is actually based around Krishna's names. But it seemed like a bit of a high level for me to start with. So I just enrolled for a basic correspondence course for now with the Central Sanskrit University in Delhi. So they sent me the materials and I'm working through that, even though it's like, I guess, according to them, simple, but it's pretty, pretty intense for me. It's the manuals are nice, but it's taking a bit of time to actually go through. But it's really, there's a lot of good internet resources as well that are helping me go through it. And it's nice to actually learn the roots of the words. And the thing that actually surprised me most out of everything was that we actually think of Hindi and Sanskrit being related. But aside from the letters, they are very, very different. And the rules of Sanskrit grammar are extremely challenging. They're not straightforward at all. So that's what's taking me some time to get the hang of. But it's an actually incredible language, to get even the basics of. So that's what I've been working on because I wanted to, I really wanted to get into the writings of Jiva Goswami. So it's way beyond me, but it's something I want to work towards. I'm going to start in a small way like this.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that information. That's very nice. I actually learned Sanskrit in school in India in grade 6th, 7th, and 8th. It was mandatory subject. Yeah. So yeah, I'll go through this university website and I'll see which programs do they offer, and I'll see if something suits me. I am very interested in improving my Sanskrit skills.
Yeah, I'll send you the other link to the Mahavidyalaya, the course on the Harinam Vyakarana, Harinam Amrita Karana. Yeah, and you can look at that as well, because you may obviously be a bit more advanced in this course. You might actually be able to go straight into that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
You're welcome. Hare Krishna. Are there any other questions?
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you so much for the wonderful class. Really appreciate your time and dedication. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to serve.
I also got a quick question. What sort of diet did the Goswamis have? I'm sure they were very simple. Well, what did they eat?
So,
or what did they enjoy eating?
Well, they kind of didn't anything anything regarding personal enjoyment was not how they lived. But their diets were different actually among all of them. Although for their lords, like Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was an excellent cook. Lord Chaitanya relished his cooking. But for themselves, because they were renunciants, they lived by Madhukari. So Madhukari is basically, it's like described, because Madhu is bee, it's like a bee collects from flowers. So they collect from houses. So they would just beg at houses, but they wouldn't beg at like many houses. Srila Prabhupada, I was just listening to a class the other day when he was explaining that they weren't begging from 20 houses, then taking the chapatis and selling it in the market. They would beg from 1 or 2 houses, 1 or 2 chapatis, just to sustain themselves. In the case of Raghunath Das Goswami, his austerities were even more intense than that. He would have like half a cup of buttermilk every second day. So they were very highly renounced. They were able to sustain all the activities because they were very capable of doing many things throughout the day. They only slept for 1 or 2 hours a day. They were able to still sustain all their spiritual activities on just this little prasadam that they were taking. In fact, there's a nice story with Sanatan Goswami. So it's cute. When his deity of Madan Gopal appeared to him, and he actually, the deity chose to go with him. The deity was being served by another family, but when he came begging, he was not only attracted to the deity's beauty, but the deity wanted to now be served by Sanatan Goswami. And Sanatan Goswami told him that I live very simply. He collects a little bit of flour and he makes some balls of dough with Yamuna water, and and that's what he lives on. So the deity initially, Madan Gopal, beautiful Madan Mohan, who's now in Karoli, he was initially okay with it, and then eventually he was like, can I just have a little bit of salt with these dough balls? And that's when Sanatana Goswami said, you see, I knew you weren't going to be able to undergo these austerities with me. So by the arrangement of the Lord, Sanatana Goswami had the beautiful temple built by a merchant that's now in Dashashram Tila, that's knoll in Vrindavan near the Yamuna River. So that that I thought was was a sweet pastime between the Lord and his devotee. So they lived very simply, and yet they were able to sustain so many extraordinary spiritual activities. It's very inspiring.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji.
Welcome, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions? If there's none, we can have a bit of kirtan. So I thought today, being the disappearance day of Srila Jiva Goswami, we'd have this beautiful bhajan by Narottam Das Thakur shared. This is the bhajan that's usually sung when great Vaishnavas disappear. And since we have been discussing Narottam Das Thakur, it's kind of nice for this program also. So these are the lyrics. Okay. Janilo Premadhana Karuna Pachu Janilo Premadhana Karuna Pachu Hena Prabhu Kota Kila Acharya Taku Hena Prabhu Kota Kila Acharya Taku Kahamura Swarupa Kahasanata Kahamura Swarupa Kahasanata Kahadasaradu Natapatita Bhava Kahadasaradu Natapatita Bhava Kahamura Bhaktayuga Kaha Kabira Kahamura Bhaktayuga Kaha Kabira Ekakale Kota Kila Gaura Tara Ekakale Kota Kila Gaura Tara Pashane Kutibo Mata Annale Pashivo Pashane Kutibo Mata Annale Pashivo Turanga Gunera Nidhi Kota Gere Pavo Turanga Gunera Nidhi Kota Gere Pavo Je Sab Sangira Sange Je Koilo Bila Je Sab Sangira Sange Je koilo bilas, te sangana paya, kande naro samodas. Te sangana paya, kande naro samodas. Je anilo Vimadana Koruna Pachu Nilo Vimadana Koruna Pachu Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, 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 Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Translation: He who brought the treasure of divine love and who is filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Advaita Acharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishna Das Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against the rock and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottam Das simply weeps. Srila Jiva Goswami ki jai, Srila Srinivasa Acharya, Srila Narottam Das Thakur, Srila Shamananda Pandit ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Sri Srinivasa Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak on these wonderful personalities. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you for all your questions as well. May you all have an extraordinarily wonderful year in the service of Srila Prabhupada and improve and increase on all your devotional practices. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.